It's the winter of 1861-1862, and the Texas Brigade had settled into their winter quarters. They've been joined by the 18th Georgia Infantry and now consist of the 1st, 4th, and 5th Texas Infantry Regiments and the 18th Georgia. The brigade is commanded by Brigadier General Lewis Wigfall. They spend their time drilling, building makeshift cabins, guarding the artillery that is blockading the Potomac River, and hunting for possums. The Texans aren't used to the cold, and the winter has turned bone-chilling.
Now, in the winter of 1861, Hood's Texas Brigade is pretty much guarding the Potomac River from invasion from Union troops coming in from Washington, D.C. And it was a total new experience for Hood's. About 95% of Hood's soldiers never experienced any kind of winter like they went through. You know, Texas is a semi-warm environment all year long. So when they went to Virginia during the first snowfalls, it was a big shock. A lot of soldiers died from pneumonia.
It wasn't just the cold that had an effect on the brigade. Most of the Texans came from rural environments and weren't exposed to a lot of people. But when they were concentrated in camp, a measles epidemic took hold and ravaged the brigade. And since there was an absence of any kind of sanitary standards, typhoid fever and dysentery were commonplace. In a letter home on November the 18th, Captain Tacitus Clay of the 5th Texas reported that out of his entire company, only 40 men were fit for duty. The rest were in hospitals in Richmond or Fredericksburg.
The 1st Texas first commanding officer, Hugh McLeod, was a great general, very well liked, went to West Point from New York. He died from pneumonia, as did a whole bunch of soldiers from Hood's Texas Brigade died from pneumonia and from diseases, because there's so many men in one place at one time that diseases spread rampant.
Texans were anxious for a fight, but they were literally citizen soldiers, farmers with rifles, and it was up to the professional soldier officers like Hood and Archer to turn the undisciplined Texans into a fighting unit. So they drilled, and drilled, and drilled. Between the monotonous drilling, the inaction of camp life, the homesickness and loneliness, the Texans were itching for trouble.
And Hood's Texas Brigade got bored with guarding the river against invasion. And so one night, soldiers of the 1st Texas said, let's create a little commotion. And so what they did is, after hours, after roll call, and after they were supposed to go to bed, soldiers of the 1st Texas snuck away from camp, took boats, and rowed across the river and pretended that they were attacking a Union camp. And so they got right next to a Union camp, and they did a bunch of war whoops and shots in the air, and that really, really startled the federal forces and Dan Sickles, who was in charge of the forces there. And so they thought they were being invaded, and so they got all of the Army of the Potomac ready to defend. Well, it was just a few soldiers of the 1st Texas. And so they snuck back across the river and went back into their bunks, and nobody ever knew about it.
In another bit of mischief, Val Giles tells the story of a new camp sutler, Bailey and Brownlee, who set up shop and had 2 barrels of fine old Culpeper apple cider that they sold to Texans for 50 cents a pint. 2 dozen mischievous Texans set up a plan where one group, the High Die Committee, would divert Bailey and Brownlee at the front of the tent with an argument over dice, while the other group, the Spigot Committee, sneaked around the back and emptied the barrels. The same cider that Bailey and Brownlee were selling for 2 bits a pint, the Spigot Committee was now giving away. When the deed was done, the High Die Committee made a show of ordering 4 gallons of cider. When Bailey found out there was none and realized they'd been taken, the soldiers erupted, whooping and yelling, while the sutlers cursed. Christmas Day, 1861, and the Texans of the Texas Brigade would spend their first Christmas away from their homes and families. Val Giles and 20 others drew picket duty to stand guard along the Potomac. Val was assigned to guard the artillery at Cockpit Point. It was a cold and snowy day, and Val became homesick. A sense of foreboding overtook him. At 4 p.m., he tells the story that he was startled by the sound of his brother Lou's voice calling his name. He quickly looked around and could only see the snowy pines and the Black River. He later found out that his brother Lewis Giles of Troop D, Terry's Texas Rangers, died at that exact time from the wounds he suffered at the Battle of Woodsonville, Kentucky. In the first Confederate congressional election, held in November 1861, Lewis T. Wigfall was elected to the Confederate State Senate. He resigned his commission on February the 20th, 1862, to take his seat in the first CSA congressional session.
One thing about Lewis T. Wigfall is that he was the first commanding officer of the brigade. He was made general, and it's a good thing. He never really led his men in battle because he liked his whiskey, and he was drunk a lot of the times. And when he always thought that there was a Union attack against the Texas Brigade, so they would fall into battle formation, and there was nothing going on. And so when he was elected to the Confederate Congress, it really saved the Hood's Texas Brigade from being led into slaughter, because Senator Wigfall, he had good intentions, but he never had any battle experience. And so when he was sent to the Congress, and John Bell Hood was made Brigadier General because he was Colonel of the 4th Texas, and then he was made commander of the Texas Brigade. That was about the best thing that ever happened to the Texas Brigade. But the winter of 1861 was boredom. One thing about it, though, is there was always some sort of yelling and against, the Potomac River. Some of it was very narrow. And so you had Union soldiers, kind of insulting the Texas soldiers, saying, "Yeah, we heard about you Texans. We don't think you're as tough as you think you are." And the Texans kind of just smiled and said, "Well, you'll see. And they did. And at Second Manassas, our Second Bull Run, on August 30th, 1862, they found out the hard way that the Texans were something. Yeah.
With Wigfall leaving to go to the Senate, John Bell Hood was promoted to Brigadier General and selected to become the commander of the Texas Brigade. That would, from that time forward, be known as Hood's Texas Brigade. In other organizational changes, Alexis T. Rainey was promoted to colonel to lead the 1st Texas, and John F. Marshall to take Hood's place and lead the 4th. On March the 7th, 1862, Val Giles reports that they were ordered to cook 3 days' rations, the sure sign they were about to move out. On March the 8th, Hood assembled the old regiment, rode to the center, and took off his hat. "Soldiers," he said, "you are leaving your comfortable winter quarters to enter upon a stirring campaign. A campaign which will be filled with blood and fraught with the dangers of our young Confederacy. Its success or failure rests upon the soldiers of the South. They are equal to the emergency. I feel no hesitation in predicting that you, at least, will discharge your duties. And when the struggle does come, that proud banner you bear will ever be found in the thickest of the fray. Fellow soldiers, Texans, let us stand or fall together." And with that, Hood's Texas Brigade was off to join the Peninsula Campaign.